The whispers started at dusk. They were a sound like dry leaves skittering across cold stone, sharp and brittle. Aveline heard them from the small forgotten chamber in the west wing, where she was allowed to exist. Not live, just exist. Her name. They were saying her name, Aveline. The syllables were a curse on their tongues, a stain, the word for murderer, the word for traitor, Luna killer, Kingslayer. A year ago tonight, the moon had watched her become a monster. Now its light was beginning to bleed through the high, grimy window of her room. Pale and accusing, she did not look at it. She hadn't looked the moon in the eye for 365 nights. The goddess had abandoned her anyway. A cold draft slithered under her door, carrying the scent of pine and ceremonial smoke from the great hall. They were preparing the memorial, Maelon's memorial, a ritual of grief she was forbidden to attend, but forced to witness from the shadows. Her hands, scrubbing a worn wooden floorboard, stilled. The rough bristles of the brush dug into her palm. She focused on the pain. It was real, grounding, better than the other ache, the hollow one that lived in her throat, right where their mating mark had been torn away. Sometimes it still burned, a phantom fire under her skin. A howl rose from the courtyard below, long and mournful. It was a sound of pure sorrow, a chorus of pack lament that vibrated through the castle stones and up through the soles of her bare feet. A year. An entire year since their Alpha King had fallen, and his Luna still breathed. It was an insult to his memory. She knew it. She felt it in the way the guards refused to meet her eyes, the way the Omegas left her food outside her door as if she were carrying a plague. She was. A plague of truth, a sickness of secrets. Aveline pushed herself to her feet, her joints aching from the cold. The coarse linen of her tunic, the color of dust and sorrow, draped against her skin. She had once worn silks the color of twilight and silver threads that shimmered like stars. Now she wore her shame. Her gaze drifted to the small, cracked shard of mirror she kept hidden beneath a loose stone in the wall. She rarely looked. The face that stared back was a stranger, thin, haunted. Her hair, once a river of dark sable, was dull and often tangled. But it was her eyes that held the real ruin. They were the color of a winter storm, and they held the memory of Maelon's last breath. She saw it every time she closed them. His powerful body, still and broken. The surprise in his amber eyes, not of betrayal, but of something else. Something she could never speak aloud. The scent of his blood, coppery and sacred, filling the air. And the silence that followed. A silence so profound it had swallowed her voice along with her soul. She had not spoken a word since. Another howl, this one closer, sharper, impatient. It was time. She didn't need a summons. She knew the ritual. She was a part of it. The final, ugly centerpiece of their grief. The living embodiment of their loss. She walked out of her cell-like room, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. This wing of the castle was a tomb, sealed off from the warmth and life of the main keep. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight, a silent, swirling galaxy of decay. The air grew heavier as she neared the great hall, thick with the scent of burning herbs, old grief, and the simmering resentment of the pack. She could feel their emotions like a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, hatred, sorrow, confusion. She paused at the entrance to the gallery, a high stone balcony that overlooked the main floor. Below, the entire Thorn pack was gathered. Hundreds of them, their faces upturned toward the throne, Maelon's throne. It sat empty, draped in black velvet. A single white wolfsbane flower lay on the carved seat. Elder Kalis stood before it, his back ramrod straight, his silver-streaked hair gleaming in the torchlight. He had taken over as regent, a grim, unyielding wolf who ruled with the iron fist of tradition. It was he who had spared her from execution, not out of kindness. No, he had told her himself. Death is a release, he had rasped, his eyes like chips of flint. You will live with what you've done. You will be our reminder of the cost of a broken oath. So she lived, and she reminded them. Her presence in the gallery was the signal. A hush fell over the crowd. Every head, one by one, turned and lifted. Hundreds of pairs of eyes, gold, green, brown, fixed on her. She felt their collective glare like 1,000 tiny needles piercing her skin. They didn't see Aveline, the girl who had healed their wounded and blessed their newborns. They saw the monster from their nightmares. She gripped the cold stone railing, her knuckles white. Her breath hitched. She forced herself to remain still, to present the placid, empty mask she had perfected. Let them look. Let them hate. Their judgment was a shield for the truth she could never bear to face. Kalis raised a hand, his voice booming through the cavernous hall. 1 year ago, on this night of the full moon, our king was stolen from us. Our alpha, our brother, our future. His gaze flicked up to her, sharp and accusing. He was not taken by a rival pack, not felled by a rogue. He was betrayed, struck down in the heart of his own home by the one who wore his mark. A low growl rumbled through the assembled pack, a wave of sound that was pure menace. Aveline's gaze dropped to the floor. She could feel the phantom ache in her throat sharpen into a blade. His mark. It had felt like the sun itself, a warm, permanent part of her soul. Now it was just a scar. An ugly, puckered ruin of flesh that mirrored the one that had ended his life. We gather to honor his memory, Kalis continued, to remember Malon Thorn, the greatest alpha this land has ever known, and to remember the price of treason. He turned back to the throne. The pack followed his lead, their attention shifting away from her. The pressure on her chest eased, but only slightly. She was a ghost at this feast of sorrow, unseen but always felt. The ceremony began. Elders spoke of Malon's strength, his fairness, his courage. Warriors recounted his victories in battle. Mothers whispered of his kindness. Every word was a fresh cut, carving his absence deeper into her heart. She remembered a different Malon, the one who brought her wildflowers from the high meadows, the one whose laughter could shake the foundations of the castle, the one who would trace the curve of her spine in the dark and whisper secrets only the moon was meant to hear. "Where did you go, Malon?" she screamed in the echoing silence of her mind. "Where did we go?" The air in the hall began to change. It started subtly, a drop in temperature, a sudden cold that had nothing to do with the stone walls and everything to do with the marrow of her bones. The torches flickered wildly, as if caught in a gale, though not a breath of wind stirred. Aveline shivered, wrapping her thin arms around herself. Down below, the pack felt it too. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Wolves shifted uneasily on their feet, their heads cocked, sniffing the air. Their animal instincts screamed that something was wrong. The scent hit her next. It cut through the heavy smell of smoke and herbs like a blade of ice. Pine needles crushed after a winter storm. The clean, sharp scent of frost on frozen earth. Malon's scent. Her heart stopped. No, it was impossible. A memory. A trick of her grieving mind. It had happened before, in fleeting moments, a phantom scent that vanished as quickly as it came. But this was different. This was strong, real, overwhelming. It was as if he were standing right beside her. Her head snapped up, her eyes scanning the shadowy corners of the gallery. Nothing. No one. But the cold was intensifying. A deep, unnatural chill that settled in the hall like a shroud. The torches sputtered, their flames turning a strange, ghostly blue. A profound silence fell, so complete that the frantic beat of her own pulse was a drum against her ribs. Down below, Kalis had frozen mid-sentence, his face a mask of disbelief. Every wolf in the hall was stock-still, their eyes wide, their senses overwhelmed by the impossible presence that was filling the space. Aveline gripped the railing, her body trembling uncontrollably. This wasn't memory. This wasn't madness. This was him. And then she saw it. In the empty space before the throne, the air began to shimmer. Moonlight pouring in from the high-arched windows seemed to bend and thicken, coalescing into a form. Mist and shadow and silver light twisted together, weaving a shape that was achingly familiar. Broad shoulders, a proud, straight back. The height that had always made her feel so safe. A man was taking form out of thin air. A collective gasp swept through the hall, a strangled sound of terror and awe. He solidified, not as a faint, transparent spirit, but as something solid, real. He stood before his own empty throne, dressed in the black leathers he had worn the night he died. His dark hair was wild, his jaw set, and his eyes found hers across the cavernous space, amber and gold, burning with an intensity that defied death itself. They were Malon's eyes, but it was the mark on his throat that stole her breath. A gruesome, torn wound, exactly as she remembered it, dark and stark against the pale skin of his throat, a wound that could not exist on a spirit. He was not just a ghost, he was a wound given form, a memory made flesh. The pack was paralyzed, caught between the instinct to flee and the instinct to kneel. Some whimpered, sinking to the ground. Others drew weapons they would have no idea how to use. Kalis stood his ground, but his face was ashen, his knuckles white where he gripped the ceremonial staff. Aveline couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The world had narrowed to the impossible man standing below, and the silent scream trapped in her chest. He took a step. The sound of his boot on the stone was faint, ethereal, yet it echoed like a thunderclap in the unnatural silence. He walked past the terrified members of his pack, his burning gaze never leaving her face. He moved through them as if they were mist, his focus absolute. He was looking at her, only her. He saw her, the monster, the murderer. He had come back. For vengeance, for justice. He stopped directly below the gallery, craning his neck to look up at her. The moonlight caught the sharp planes of his face, the faint scar above his brow, the grim set of his mouth. It was him, every perfect, terrible detail of him. Her knees gave out. She sank to the cold floor, her hands still clutching the stone railing. Tears she hadn't shed in a year burned hot behind her eyes. He had come back, and he knew. He must have known what she did, what she sacrificed. His voice, when it came, was not a boom of spectral rage. It was a whisper, a sound torn from the grave, rough and full of shattered ice. It carried across the silent hall and struck her heart like a silver arrow. He spoke the one word she never thought she'd hear him say again, the one name the pack had turned into a curse. But from his lips, it was not a curse. It sounded like a prayer, a question, a memory. Aveline. His voice shattered the silence. It was her name, but it was also a stone thrown into a frozen lake, and the cracks spread instantly. Panic erupted in the great hall. A wave of terrified shouts and whimpers broke the spell of Malin's arrival. Wolves scrambled backward, tripping over one another, their lament forgotten in the face of raw, primal fear. The dead did not walk. The dead did not speak. Aveline remained on the floor of the gallery, her body a knot of ice and fire. His voice echoed not in the air, but inside her skull. Aveline. He had said it as he had 1,000 times before. In the dark, in the dawn, in the moments between breaths. It was the sound of home, and the sound of her damnation. Below, Elder Kalis finally found his own voice. He raised his heavy ceremonial staff, its polished wood looking like a flimsy twig against the impossible presence before him. "Abomination!" he roared, his voice shaking but filled with fury. "What dark magic is this? Begone from this hall!" Malon did not even turn his head. His spectral form remained fixed, his amber eyes locked on Aveline. He was a statue carved from moonlight and memory, immune to the chaos he had created. He saw only her. In a hall of hundreds, he saw only the one they called his murderer. The pack's fear began to curdle into something else. Confusion, suspicion. Their alpha king had returned from the grave, and he was not looking at his loyal regent, nor his grieving warriors. He was looking at the disgraced Luna. Their gazes shifted from the ghost to Aveline, then back again. The whispers started once more, no longer about her crime, but about this impossibility. Why her? Why does he look at her? Aveline tried to push herself up, but her limbs refused to obey. The cold radiating from Malon's form was a physical force, pinning her down. It seeped into her bones, a familiar chill she hadn't felt in a year. The cold of his power, the cold of winter itself, which had always answered his call. She felt a phantom itch on her throat, the ruined flesh where their bond had been carved. It was a dead thing, scar tissue and regret. But right now, it tingled with a faint ghostly warmth, a pins and needles sensation, as if blood were trying to flow through veins that no longer existed. He feels it too, a part of her mind whispered. He must. Malon took another step, closer to the base of the gallery stairs. The movement was slow, deliberate. His form flickered for a moment, the torchlight behind him showing through his chest, a reminder that he was not truly flesh, not anymore. "Do not approach her, Wraith!" a warrior snarled, finding a sliver of courage. It was Kian, Melon's former beta, a wolf whose loyalty had been as solid as the mountain itself. Now his face was pale, his hand on the hilt of his sword. "You will not defile this hall with your presence, whatever you are." Melon's gaze finally shifted. It dropped from Aveline and swept over the warrior. It was not a look of anger. It was a look of immense, ancient power. The torches in the hall flared violently, sucking the air from the room. The temperature plummeted further. Frost began to spiderweb across the stone floor at Melon's feet. Kian choked, stumbling back as if struck by a physical blow. The simple, silent glance from his dead alpha held more authority than a year of Kaelus's iron-fisted rule. The message was clear. "I am still your king." Silence descended once more, a fragile, terrified silence. Every wolf in the hall understood. This was no mere spirit. This was power. This was Melon Thorn. His eyes returned to Aveline. The inferno in them softened just for a moment, and something akin to pain flickered in their depths. He raised a hand, his fingers translucent against the flickering light. He pointed, not at her, but at the empty throne beside him, draped in black. His voice came again, a rasp of wind through dead trees, yet every wolf heard it as clearly as a command. "Why, is it empty?" The question was not for Kaelus. It was not for the pack. It was for her. Aveline's breath caught in her throat. A sob, thick and voiceless, tried to claw its way out. How could she answer? Her voice was a ghost too, buried in the same grave he had just crawled out of. She could only stare, her eyes wide with a truth she could never speak. "Because you are dead," she screamed in her mind. "Because I killed you." Kaelus stepped forward, his face a mask of grim determination. He would not allow this specter to undermine his authority. "The throne is empty in your honor, my king," he said, his voice measured, respectful but firm. "We mourn you. We have for a year. This pack has a regent. It has order." Melon's head tilted slightly, a familiar, questioning gesture that sent a fresh stab of grief through Aveline's heart. "Order," he whispered, the word laced with something cold and sharp. His gaze drifted over the pack, seeing the fear in their eyes, the distrust. He looked at Kaelus, his hand clenched around the staff of leadership. "This is not order. This is fear." His eyes snapped back to Aveline. "Tell me," he commanded, his voice gaining strength, resonating through the stone. "Tell me what happened." A single hot tear finally escaped and traced a path through the grime on her cheek. She shook her head, a small, frantic motion. Her hands flew to her throat, to the scar, a gesture of pure instinct. "I can't. Don't ask me." He saw the gesture. His own hand, still raised, drifted to the jagged, torn flesh on his own neck. The wound that mirrored hers. A faint silver light began to glow from it. Aveline gasped. Not a sound, just a sharp intake of air. The tingle on her own throat intensified, becoming a searing heat. It burned. It burned with a fire she thought was long extinguished. The fire of their bond. It wasn't broken. Goddess, it wasn't broken. It was just dormant, wounded, waiting. The pack saw it too. They saw the unholy light emanating from their dead king's fatal wound. They saw Aveline clutching her own throat, her face contorted in agony. They saw the connection, undeniable and terrifying, arcing between the murderer and her victim. "Sorcery!" Kaelus bellowed, his fear finally giving way to righteous rage. "She has bound him. Even in death, her treachery holds him here. Seize her!" 2 guards on the gallery started toward her, their faces grim, but they only took a single step before Melon moved. He didn't walk. He flowed. A river of shadow and cold. He surged toward the base of the stairs, his form solidifying with every inch. A low growl echoed from his chest, a sound that was not of this world, a sound that promised an eternity of winter. The guards froze in their tracks, their training useless against the ghost of the alpha they had sworn to obey. Melon placed a foot on the first step of the staircase leading to the gallery. To her, the stone groaned under a weight that shouldn't exist. He was coming for her. Panic, pure and absolute, seized Aveline. She couldn't face him. She couldn't let him get close. If he touched her, he would know. He would feel the truth of that night. The ugly, desperate secret she had carried in silence for a year. He would know the mercy that looked so much like murder. She scrambled backward, away from the railing, crab walking across the dusty floor. Her back hit the cold wall of the corridor. Trapped. He kept climbing, step after agonizing step. His eyes never left her, a predator's focus, a king's intent. The burning on her throat was unbearable now, a brand being pressed anew into her soul. Through the pain, she could almost feel him. His rage, his confusion, and beneath it all, a deep, aching wound that had nothing to do with his throat. The wound of her betrayal. "Aveline," he said again, his voice closer now, stripped of its ethereal echo. It was just him, guttural, pained. Why? The single word was her undoing. She closed her eyes, the silent scream in her soul finally finding a crack in the dam. A sound tore from her lips. Not a word, not a cry, just a raw, broken rasp of air, like a snapped rope. The first sound she had made in a year. The sound was her answer, her confession, her plea. Malon stopped, his foot hovering over the last step. He was only feet away from her now. The cold was so intense her teeth chattered. His scent, pine and frost and something otherworldly, like starlight and graves, filled her senses. He saw the utter devastation on her face. He heard the shattered sound she had made, and something in his spectral form wavered. The burning anger in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a flicker of profound confusion, as if the monster he had come back to confront was not the woman cowering before him. The great bell in the castle tower began to toll. Midnight. The peak of the full moon's power was passing. Malon's form began to thin, the edges of him blurring into smoke and moonlight. The silver glow on his throat faded. The intense cold began to recede. He looked down at his own hands, watching them become transparent. He looked back at her, a desperate, haunted expression on his face. He had run out of time. He reached for her, his ghostly fingers stretching across the last few feet of stone that separated them. They were almost transparent, like smoke, but she felt their chilling touch as if they had caressed her very soul. He didn't have the strength to hold his form. His voice was a final, fading whisper, carried on the last wave of his cold presence. A whisper meant only for her. The moon remembers. And then he was gone. The air rushed back into the hall. The torches returned to their normal golden flame. The oppressive cold vanished, leaving only the normal chill of the stone castle. It was as if he had never been there, but the frost on the floor remained, and the searing, agonizing burn on Aveline's throat was real. She stared at the empty space where he had stood, her entire body shaking. The ghost of a king was gone, but the fire from his mark had just been rekindled. Silence, then chaos. The moment Malon's presence dissolved, the great hall exploded. Guards shouted, wolves growled, and Elder Kalis's voice cut through the pandemonium like a whip crack. "Seize the witch!" Aveline didn't wait. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded her veins, overriding the terror that had frozen her. She scrambled to her feet, her gaze darting toward the narrow, winding service staircase at the far end of the gallery. Her one escape. The guards who had been paralyzed by Malon's presence now surged forward, their fear replaced by a renewed, righteous fury. They saw her not as a grieving widow, but as a necromancer, a dark sorceress, who had summoned their king's tortured spirit. "She brought him back," someone shrieked from below. "A puppet for her dark magic." Aveline lunged for the staircase, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone. The coarse tunic caught on a loose splinter of the railing, and she ripped it free, not feeling the scratch. She could hear their heavy boots pounding the floor behind her. They were close, so close. The mark on her throat was a pulsing coal, a beacon of her connection to him. It wasn't just a scar anymore. It was alive. It throbbed in time with her frantic heartbeat, a searing reminder that their bond was not severed. And if it wasn't severed, what did that mean? The thought was a dangerous spark in the tinderbox of her mind. She couldn't afford to think. She could only run. She plunged into the darkness of the servants' passage, a narrow, winding tunnel of stone built into the castle's thick outer wall. The air was stale, thick with the scent of dust and damp. She knew these passages better than anyone. In her first years as Luna, she had explored every forgotten corner of the keep, driven by a restless curiosity Malon had found so endearing. Now that knowledge was her only shield. She heard the guards enter the passage behind her, their armored bodies scraping against the narrow walls. Their torchlight cast long dancing shadows that leaped and twisted around her. "There's nowhere to run, murderer," Kion's voice echoed, rough with anger and a deep, wounded confusion she could practically taste. He had loved Maelon like a brother. Seeing him as a ghost, seemingly bound to his killer, it must have shattered something inside him. Aveline didn't answer. Her voice was still a locked box in her chest. She focused on the feel of the stone under her palms, the rhythm of her breathing, the searing pulse on her neck. The moon remembers. Maelon's last words. What did they mean? A threat? A promise? A clue? She reached a junction, a place where the passage split. One way led down to the kitchens, a certain trap. The other led up, toward the old abandoned rookery at the peak of the North Tower, a dead end, but a defensible one. She chose up. Her lungs burned, her legs screaming in protest. She hadn't run like this in a year. Her body, weakened by meager rations and endless grief, was failing her, but the fire in her throat urged her on. It was more than pain. It was a current of energy, a faint echo of the strength she had once drawn from their bond, Maelon's strength. She reached the top of the stairs and burst through a heavy wooden door onto the rookery's open-air platform. The wind hit her like a physical blow, cold and fierce. It tore at her tunic and whipped her hair across her face. Below, the entire castle courtyard was a sea of chaos, lit by torches. Wolves ran in every direction, their howls a mix of fear and rage. She was the eye of the storm, the cause of it all. She slammed the heavy oak door shut and fumbled for the thick iron bar to brace it. It was rusted and heavy. Her fingers, numb with cold, struggled to find a purchase. She could hear the guards clattering up the final steps. With a final desperate heave, she slid the bar into place, just as the first heavy thud struck the door from the other side. Thump, thump, thump. "Open this door, Aveline. Kion roared, his voice muffled by the thick wood. "Face your judgment." She stumbled back, pressing her body against the cold stone of the parapet. Trapped. The sky was a vast, dark ocean above her, the full moon a merciless silver eye, watching. It saw everything. It remembered everything. She clutched her throat. The searing pain was beginning to subside, leaving a dull, persistent ache. But it felt different, changed. The dead scar tissue felt softer, more pliable, as if something under the surface was healing, or waking up. She risked a glance over the edge. The drop was dizzying, a straight fall to the jagged stones of the courtyard, hundreds of feet below. There was no escape. The pounding on the door grew more frantic, more violent. The old wood groaned, splintering around the edges. It wouldn't hold for long. She closed her eyes, her back pressed against the cold and unyielding stone. Her mind raced, replaying the last year in a frantic, disjointed blur. The silence, the hate-filled eyes, the endless, crushing weight of her secret. She had accepted her fate. A life of silent penance, a slow death in the shadow of Maelon's memory. She had done it to protect them, to protect the pack from a truth far more terrifying than a traitorous Luna. But Maelon's return had changed the equation. He wasn't at peace. He was trapped. A wounded spirit tethered to the world by their unbroken bond. And he was searching for answers she couldn't give him. A loud crack echoed from the door. A splinter of wood flew past her face. They were breaking through. Her survival instinct, dormant for so long, screamed at her. She couldn't let them take her. Kalis would not be merciful this time. He would see her spectral reunion with Maelon as the ultimate proof of witchcraft. He would burn her, and her secret would die with her. Maelon would never know the truth. He would be trapped forever, a ghost haunting his own throne, believing she had betrayed him. The thought was more painful than any execution. She pushed herself off the wall, her gaze sweeping the small circular platform. Old nesting boxes for ravens, long abandoned, a pile of loose stones, and a rope. A thick coiled rope used by masons for repairs, left forgotten in a corner. It was weathered and frayed, but it looked strong. It was a chance. A desperate, insane chance. She scrambled toward it, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door shuddered again, the iron bar groaning in protest. She grabbed the rope. It was heavy, stiff with age and damp. She hauled it toward the parapet, her mind working faster than it had in a year. There was an old iron gargoyle jutting out from the wall just below the platform. its snarling face worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. If she could secure the rope around its neck, another tremendous crash. The door splintered, a crack appearing down its center. A man's eye peered through. "She's in here!" No more time. Aveline worked with frantic, clumsy haste, her fingers raw and bleeding. She looped the rope around the thickest part of the parapet, praying to a goddess she no longer believed in that it would hold her weight, even for a moment. She threw the rest of the coil over the side. It unspooled into the darkness, a thin swaying line against the immense drop. She didn't know if it reached the bottom. She didn't care. All she needed was to get off this tower. With a final, gut-wrenching, splintering sound, the door burst inward. Keon and 2 other guards spilled onto the platform, their swords drawn, their faces grim in the moonlight. They saw her at the edge, 1 foot on the parapet, the rope clutched in her hands. For a heartbeat, they all stood frozen. "Luna," Keon breathed, the old title slipping out, a ghost of a different time. His eyes weren't just angry anymore. They were filled with a profound, pleading sorrow. "Don't, whatever this is, we can just stop." She looked at him, at the wolf who had been Melon's shadow, his friend. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the loyalty to his dead king warring with the orders of his new regent. She gave him the only answer she had. She shook her head, a single sad gesture of refusal, and then she swung herself over the edge. The fall was a stomach-lurching shock of adrenaline. The rope burned through her hands, tearing the skin from her palms. The rough stone of its tower wall scraped against her back. For a terrifying second, she thought the rope wouldn't hold. She heard a shout of alarm from above, but it was distant, snatched away by the wind. Her descent slowed, then stopped with a jarring jerk that nearly pulled her arms from their sockets. She dangled there, spinning slowly, 100 feet above the courtyard. The rope had held. She hung in the darkness, suspended between the sky and the earth, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Her hands were on fire. Her entire body screamed in protest. Below, the chaos in the courtyard had noticed her. Shouts went up. Torches moved, converging on the base of the north tower. Above, she could see the silhouettes of Keon and the guards leaning over the edge, staring down in disbelief. She had to move. Hand over hand, ignoring the searing pain, she began to lower herself. The rope was slick with her own blood, making her grip treacherous. Every movement was an agony. She was halfway down when a new sensation started. The burn on her throat, the mark, it began to bleed. Not externally, there was no blood on her skin. It was an internal sensation, a feeling of warmth and wetness spreading beneath the scar. It was as if the bond itself, woken by Melon's presence, was now hemorrhaging energy, and with it came a whisper. Not a sound, a feeling, a thought that was not her own, cold, so cold. It was him, Melon, a faint residual echo of his consciousness, snagged on the thread of their bond. He was somewhere else, somewhere dark and freezing, and a sliver of his eternal winter was bleeding through into her. A shudder racked her body, a chill so deep it had nothing to do with the wind. The sensation gave her a new, desperate strength. He was still connected to her, he was lost, and he was in pain. And Kalis and the pack thought she was the one torturing him. They would never understand. She had to get away. Not just to save herself, but to figure this out. To understand what was happening to their bond, and what was keeping him tethered to this world. She reached the end of the rope. It was still a good 30 feet from the ground. She had no choice. She let go, bending her knees, and hit the ground in a hard, rolling fall that sent a shockwave of pain up her spine. She lay there for a second, gasping for air on the cold cobblestones, the world spinning around her. "There she is! Surround her!" She forced herself to her feet, stumbling, and ran. Not toward the gate, but toward the woods. The vast, dark forest that bordered the castle grounds. The Whisper Wood, her only sanctuary. An arrow hissed past her ear, thudding into the earth just ahead of her. She didn't look back. She plunged into the tree line, the familiar scent of pine and damp earth enveloping her. The darkness was absolute under the thick canopy. She ran blindly, guided by instinct, by the memory of every path and hollow. She ran until her lungs were fire and her legs were lead. She ran until the shouts and the torchlight faded behind her. She ran until the only sounds were the pounding of her own blood in her ears and the frantic, voiceless whispers of a dead king bleeding through a mark on her throat. The forest swallowed her whole. Branches like skeletal fingers clawed at her face and hair, tearing at her thin tunic. The ground was a treacherous carpet of slick roots and unseen hollows, trying to catch her, to drag her down. She ran on instinct alone, her body a vessel of pure, screaming pain. Her hands, goddess, her hands. They were a shredded, bloody mess, the skin flayed from her palms by the rope. Every time she stumbled and caught herself on a tree trunk, the agony was a white-hot flash behind her eyes. But it was the cold inside her that was worse. It was his cold, Malon's. It seeped through the burning mark on her throat, a constant, chilling whisper against her soul. Lost. So lost. She could feel his confusion, a disorienting fog that mirrored her own. He was a ghost clinging to an anchor, and that anchor was her. The bond, the thing she thought was a curse, was the only thing keeping his spirit from dissolving into nothing. The shouts of the pack had faded, but she knew they were still coming. They would hunt her by scent. Keon was the best tracker in the 7 territories. He would not give up. She had to hide. She had to think. Her lungs felt like they were full of broken glass. Her legs were trembling, ready to give out. She spotted a dark shape ahead, a massive ancient oak that had fallen in some long-forgotten storm. Its hollowed-out trunk was a gaping maw, a perfect pocket of darkness. With the last of her strength, she half ran, half fell into the hollow, collapsing onto a bed of damp, decaying leaves. For a moment, she just lay there, her body shuddering, her breath tearing from her throat in raw, silent sobs. The darkness was absolute, a comforting blanket. The earthy scent of rot and loam filled her senses, masking the smell of her own blood. Slowly, carefully, she sat up, cradling her injured hands to her chest. In the pitch black, her other senses sharpened. She could hear the frantic drumming of her own heart, the scuttling of some small creature in the wood, the distant sigh of the wind through the high canopy. She was alone, but she wasn't. The mark on her throat pulsed with a soft internal warmth, a counterpoint to the ghost cold that still clung to her. She touched it with trembling fingers. The scar tissue felt alive, not just woken but actively changing. The ragged edges seemed smoother, the puckered skin softer. It was healing. How could a dead bond heal? Because he isn't dead, the thought came. Unbidden and terrifying. Not completely. He was caught somewhere between. A prisoner of the oath they had sworn. The oath that said death will not part us. They had whispered it under a blood moon, their voices full of youthful arrogance and absolute certainty. They had thought it was poetry, a promise. They never imagined it could become a cage. A twig snapped outside. Aveline froze, every muscle in her body going rigid. The sound was close, too close. Her heart leaped into her throat, beating a frantic rhythm against the burning mark. She held her breath, straining to listen. It wasn't the heavy, deliberate tread of the castle guards. This was something else. A lighter footfall, but heavier in its intent. Stealthy, predatory. She flattened herself against the back of the hollow log, trying to melt into the shadows, to become nothing more than a patch of darkness. Another sound, a low sniffing, right at the entrance to the log. A deep, wet inhale, tasting the air, tasting her, a low growl rumbled. So deep and powerful she felt it vibrate through the wood and into her bones. It was not Keon. It was not one of her pack. The scent hit her then, a foul, rank odor of wet fur, old blood, and unchecked aggression. It was the scent of a rogue. A lone wolf, driven mad by isolation, its pack bonds severed, its soul turned feral. They were the nightmares parents used to frighten their children, and this one was real. A massive head blotted out the faint moonlight at the entrance to the hollow. Its eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light, devoid of reason or recognition. They were the eyes of pure hunger. Saliva dripped from its jowls, its black lips pulled back to reveal teeth like yellowed daggers. Aveline's blood ran cold. She was trapped, injured. She had no weapon, no strength left to fight. The rogue wolf took a step into the hollow, its huge body blocking all light. It lowered its head, the growl intensifying into a death rattle. It was savoring her fear, the scent of her blood a feast for its senses. This was it. After a year of living as a ghost, this was how she would die, not by the pack's judgment, but by the random, brutal violence of the forest. Perhaps it was for the best. Her death would finally sever the bond. It would free Malon. The rogue lunged, and the world went silent. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in a heartbeat. The air crackled, suddenly thick and heavy, charged with an impossible power. Frost, stark white and immediate, bloomed on the inside of the hollow log, racing across the decaying wood like a living thing. Aveline's breath plumed in front of her face, a cloud of white vapor. The rogue, mid-lunge, stopped as if it had hit a wall of solid ice. It landed awkwardly, its claws scrabbling for purchase on the newly frozen ground. Its growl died in its throat, replaced by a confused, terrified whine. The air inside the hollow shimmered. The oppressive scent of the rogue was suddenly gone, completely erased by an overwhelming fragrance of pine needles after a blizzard and the clean, sharp bite of winter frost. Malon's scent. Aveline stared. Her heart stopped in her chest. The mark on her throat was blazing now. A searing point of heat that flooded her body not with pain, but with a tidal wave of pure, undiluted power. His power. The rogue wolf could see nothing, but it could feel it. Every hackle on its back was raised. It could feel the silent, immense pressure of an authority so far beyond its own that its feral instincts screamed at it to submit, or to flee. A pressure built in Aveline's mind, a presence that was not her own. It was Malon. He was not a ghost of light and shadow this time. He was a feeling, a weight, a killing intent so profound it was a physical force. He was seeing through her eyes, using her as his anchor, his window into the world he could no longer touch. And he was protecting what was his. A shadow fell over the rogue, a shadow cast by nothing, a pocket of deeper, colder darkness. The wolf whimpered, its body trembling violently. It looked at Aveline, and for the first time, it didn't see prey. It saw the vessel of a terrifying, unseen king. With a final, panicked yelp, the rogue scrambled backward out of the hollow log and fled, crashing blindly through the undergrowth, its terror a palpable scent, left hanging in the frozen air. Silence. The profound cold remained for a long moment, a protective shroud. The frost on the wood glittered in the faint light. Aveline sat trembling, not from fear, but from the raw power that had just surged through her. Then, as gently as it came, the killing cold receded. The pressure in her mind eased. The searing heat on her throat softened to a steady, comforting warmth. She was alone again, but the air was different. The forest no longer felt threatening. It felt watched, guarded. A single thought, clear as a winter sky, bloomed in the quiet of her mind. It wasn't a whisper of pain or confusion. It was a statement, a vow, an oath that had crossed the veil of death to be kept. It was his voice, his will, his very essence, wrapping around her soul through the rekindled bond. And it spoke a single, undeniable truth: mine. The word was not a sound. It was a brand on her soul, a claiming, a truth she had tried to bury under a mountain of silence and shame. Aveline stayed in the hollow of the fallen oak for what felt like hours, long after the rogue had fled. The echo of Malon's power clung to her, a phantom cloak of winter and authority. It was a terrifying, exhilarating sensation. For a year she had been nothing, a broken omega, a pariah. Now the ghost of an alpha king had just used her as a conduit for his will. He had protected her. She was not just his murderer. She was still his Luna. The realization settled in her bones, heavy and profound. The bond wasn't just a tether for his spirit. It was a two-way street. He had felt her terror. He had answered. But what did it mean for him? Did it drain him? Did it cause him pain to reach across the veil? The thought of causing him more suffering, even in death, was a fresh twist of the knife in her heart. The first hint of dawn began to filter through the canopy, painting the darkness in shades of gray. She couldn't stay here. Kian would find her tracks eventually, and the rogue could return gone. Once Malon's chilling presence had fully faded, she needed a safe place, a place to think, a place to understand the secret she had guarded so fiercely. There was only one such place. Carefully, she crawled out of the log. Her hands throbbed with a dull, persistent agony, but the bleeding had stopped. She moved stiffly, her body a map of aches and bruises. The forest was quiet now, waking with the soft chirps of early birds. The air was clean and cold. She knew these woods like the lines on her own scarred palms. Malon had taught her. They had spent countless hours walking these paths, his hand in hers, his voice a low rumble as he named the trees and the stars for her. Every memory was a ghost. She set her course not back toward the castle, but deeper into the woods, toward the foothills of the Silent Sisters, the 3 mountains that loomed over their territory. There, nestled in a hidden valley, was a place known only to the 2 of them. The journey was slow. She had to favor her injured hands, moving with a caution that felt foreign. Several times she caught the faint, distant scent of her pack, of Kian. They were still searching, casting a wide net through the forest. She moved like a wraith, using streams to cover her scent, keeping to the shadows. It was Malin's presence inside her, that faint but constant connection, that guided her. It was a compass in her soul, pointing her away from the hunters and toward sanctuary. She reached the valley by midday. It was a place of impossible beauty, a bowl of green meadow surrounded by sheer rock faces, with a waterfall cascading into a crystal-clear pool. In the center of the meadow stood a small stone hunting cabin built by Malon's grandfather. It was their secret place, their escape from the duties of the throne. The last time she had been here was with him, just days before he died. The memory hit her so hard she had to lean against a tree for support, her breath catching in her throat. They had lain in the grass, watching the clouds, and he had made her a promise. No matter what happens, he had whispered, his voice thick with a strange, somber weight she hadn't understood at the time. No matter what you see, or what they tell you, remember this. Remember us. He had rolled onto his side, his amber eyes fierce and pleading. Promise me, Aveline. Promise you'll remember the truth of us. She had promised, and then she had broken him. Broken them, broken everything. A tear slid down her cheek, hot and bitter. She wiped it away with the back of her wrist. This was no time for grief. This was a time for answers. The cabin was just as they had left it. A thick layer of dust covered everything, a testament to the year that had passed. But it was untouched, undisturbed. No one had been here. Kalis and the pack didn't know it existed. She pushed open the heavy wooden door, the scent of cold stone and old memories washing over her. Inside, it was a single room. A stone fireplace, a sturdy wooden bed covered in furs, a table and 2 chairs. Simple, perfect. Her first priority was her hands. She found the small store of supplies Malon always kept stocked, dried herbs, bandages, a flint and steel. Her movements were clumsy, but she managed to clean her wounds in the icy water of the stream and wrap them in clean linen. Then, exhausted, she collapsed onto the fur-covered bed, pulling a heavy wolf pelt over her shivering body. The scent of him was still here, faint and faded, woven into the very fabric of the cabin, pine in winter and him. Sleep claimed her instantly, a deep, dreamless void of utter exhaustion. She woke to darkness. The cabin was pitch black. The fire had long since died. A profound, unnatural chill had settled in the room, so deep it felt as if the stone walls themselves were made of ice. She sat up, her heart pounding. The mark on her throat was burning. A cold blue fire this time, pulsing with a steady, insistent rhythm. He was here, not just a feeling or a whisper. He was here. Malin, she breathed, the sound a fragile puff of vapor in the frozen air. Her first spoken word in a year, and it was his name. It felt like breaking a bone, painful and momentous. A shimmer of moonlight coalesced near the fireplace. It was him. His spectral form was clearer this time, more solid than it had been in the great hall. The moonlight seemed to cling to him, giving him substance. He stood there watching her, his face a mask of sorrow and confusion. The terrible wound on his throat glowed with a soft silver light. He took a step toward the bed. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, soul-crushing ache. "You spoke," he whispered, his voice a gravelly echo of what it once was. "I heard you." She nodded, unable to form another word. A lump of unshed tears was lodged in her throat. "This place," he murmured, his gaze drifting around the cabin. "I remember this place." A flicker of warmth crossed his features, a ghost of a smile. "The night of the first snow, you fell in the stream," she remembered. He had carried her back, laughing, and they had spent the night wrapped in every fur, shivering by the fire. "Why, Aveline?" His voice hardened, the brief warmth vanishing. "You promised. You promised you would remember." "I do remember," she rasped, her voice raw from disuse. "I remember everything." "Then tell me," he said, his form drifting closer, until he stood at the foot of the bed. The cold emanating from him was so intense it made her teeth ache. "Tell me why my Luna, the other half of my soul, would tear out my throat." The directness of the question struck her like a physical blow. She flinched, curling in on herself. This was it. The moment she had dreaded, the confrontation she had tried to avoid. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "You wouldn't believe me." "Try me," he commanded, the old alpha authority ringing in his ghostly voice. "I am a dead man, Aveline. I have nothing left but questions. Give me one truth." She looked at him, at the translucent hands, the wound that would never heal, the eyes filled with a pain that crossed the boundaries of life and death. He deserved the truth, whatever the cost. She took a deep breath, the cold air burning her lungs. "There was a curse," she began, her voice cracking. "Your bloodline, an old one, a dark one, placed on your ancestor by a fey witch centuries ago." Malon's form flickered. He stood perfectly still, listening. "It lay dormant for generations," she continued, the words tumbling out now, a flood breaking through the dam of her silence. "Waking only in times of great peace and prosperity. It was a curse of madness, a blood rage that would turn the Alpha King into a monster, forcing him to destroy everything he had built, everyone he loved, starting with his mate." She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not memory, but recognition, a story told in childhood, dismissed as legend. "Your father knew," Aveline said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "He felt it stirring in him. That's why he was so hard, so distant. He was fighting it his entire life. He abdicated the throne to you early, hoping the transfer of power would keep it dormant. But it didn't. It just transferred the curse to you." Malon's jaw tightened. The air in the cabin grew colder still. "The night of the full moon, the anniversary of your coronation, that was the night the curse was prophesied to fully awaken," she said, tears now flowing freely down her face. "You started changing. I saw it in your eyes. The gold was flaking away, turning red. You didn't know what you were doing. You looked at me, and you didn't see me. You saw something to be destroyed." She had to pause, choking on a sob. "You were fighting it, Malon. I saw you. You were tearing yourself apart from the inside. You grabbed my hands and you begged me. You didn't use words. You used the bond. You showed me what would happen. You turning on the pack, slaughtering the children, burning the keep to the ground. You showed me the monster you were becoming." His spectral form was trembling now, the edges of him wavering like a heat haze. "And you made me a promise," she cried, looking him straight in the eye. "You promised me that if that day ever came, you would find a way to stop it. An alpha's promise. But you couldn't. The curse was too strong." She took another ragged breath, preparing for the final, terrible truth. "So I kept your promise for you." Her voice broke. "You were lost, Malon. The man I loved was already gone, buried under the rage. The thing wearing your face. It lunged for me. And in that last second, you surfaced. Just for a moment. Your eyes were clear, and you looked at the ceremonial dagger on the table. Then you looked at me, and you nodded." "It wasn't murder," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It was the only choice you gave me. It was the only mercy I had left to give. I killed the monster to save the man. I killed my king to save my people." The silence that followed was more profound than any sound. It was the silence of a truth that had shattered two worlds. Malon stood frozen, his face a canvas of disbelief, horror, and dawning, agonizing comprehension. He looked down at his own hands, then at the wound on his throat. He remembered. Not the details, but the feeling, the rage, the fight, the terror, and the final, desperate, loving plea he had sent to her through their bond. "Stop me." "I let them think I was a monster," Aveline finished, her body shaking with the force of her confession. "I let them hate me. I took the blame, because the truth that their king, their entire bloodline, was cursed, that would have destroyed the pack far more than a traitorous Luna ever could. My silence was my last act of loyalty." Malon looked up, and the anguish in his ghostly eyes was a physical thing, a shard of ice in her heart. He had come back seeking vengeance on his murderer. Instead, he had found his savior, and his damnation, because the curse had not died with his body. He could feel it even now, a cold, dark ember still clinging to his spirit, tethered to the world by the very bond Aveline had used to grant him mercy. Her act had not destroyed the curse. It had only trapped it with him, between the worlds. He raised his hand, not in anger, but in a gesture of infinite sorrow. "What?" he whispered, his voice cracking with the weight of 100 broken promises. "Have we done?" The question hung in the frozen air of the cabin, a shard of ice suspended between them. "What have we done?" It was the sound of a shared soul breaking all over again. Aveline watched as Malin's form wavered, the moonlight that gave him substance seeming to dim. The horrifying truth of their situation settled over him, a shroud far heavier than death. He wasn't just a ghost, he was a cage, a spectral prison for the very curse she had tried to destroy. "The bond," he breathed, his translucent hand drifting to his chest. "It holds the curse to me, and it holds me to you." "I didn't know," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. I thought your death would be the end of it." "Death was not the end," he said, his voice flat, hollowed out by a despair that transcended the grave. "It was just a pause." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the full extent of his torment. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal or the confusion of his return. It was the crushing eternal weight of his failure as an alpha. He had been born to protect his pack, and his very existence, even as a spirit, was now the single greatest threat to them. "It's waking up," he said, his voice dropping to a low, guttural whisper that made the hairs on her arms stand up. "I can feel it, being here, so close to you. The bond is feeding it, healing it, making it stronger." Aveline felt a jolt of terror, the healing she had felt in the mark. The surges of power, it wasn't their bond being restored. It was the curse, drawing strength from their connection, rebuilding itself within Malin's spirit. The cold in the room intensified. A faint reddish light began to pulse within Malin's spectral form, a sickening counterpoint to the silver moonlight. It started in his chest, a malignant heart, and began to spiderweb outwards. "Malin," she gasped, her hand flying to her own throat. The mark was burning again, but this time it was a different heat, a vile, angry heat that felt parasitic. "You have to go," he gritted out, his form flickering violently. His amber eyes were beginning to shift, flecks of crimson appearing in their depths. "Get away from me as far as you can. Your presence, it calls to it." But she didn't move. She couldn't. After a year of silent, lonely agony, she would not abandon him again. She had run from the pack, from their judgment. She would not run from him. "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. She swung her legs off the bed, planting her bare feet on the icy stone floor. "I made a choice that night in the throne room. I won't undo it now." "You don't understand," he roared, and the sound was a monstrous thing, a blend of his voice and something ancient and dark. The windows of the cabin rattled. "It will use me to get to you, and once it has you, it will have a foothold in this world. It will find a new host. It will go for the pack, Aveline. It will finish what I started." The red light was spreading, crawling up his throat toward the wound. The curse was trying to overwrite him, to turn his memory into its weapon. She saw the terror in his eyes, the last vestiges of the man she loved, fighting a battle he had already lost once before. In that moment, everything became clear. Her silence, her exile, his return. It had all been leading to this. Not to an end, but to a different choice, a final one. The night she killed him, she had done it out of mercy, to honor his duty as Alpha. But she had been his Luna. Her duty was not just to his pack. It was to him, to his soul. "There's one way," she said, her voice clear and steady now, cutting through the rising chaos. "One way to end it. For good." Malin's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide, the red flecks swirling in a sickening vortex. He knew what she was going to say. "The oath," she whispered. "Death will not part us. It's the oath that binds you here, the oath that cages the curse. We have to break it." "No," he snarled, a sound that was less him and more the thing inside him. "Breaking the bond now, with the curse attached to it. It could destroy your soul, Aveline, annihilate you. And if we do nothing, It will destroy everyone, she countered, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. You taught me what it means to be an alpha Malon, to make the hard choice, to sacrifice for the good of the pack. Now let me teach you what it means to be a Luna. She took another step. The cold was a physical wall, pushing against her, but she walked through it. The vile energy radiating from him made her stomach clench, but she did not stop. She was his mate. Her place was at his side, in life or in the eternity that lay beyond it. She stopped directly in front of him, so close she could see the swirling vortex of red and gold in his eyes, the silent scream of the man trapped within. She could feel the icy cold of his presence, a breath away from her skin. The oath was sealed with a mark, she said softly, her voice the only calm thing in the room. It can only be unmade by the same. She raised her hands, the bandaged bloody palms a stark contrast to his ethereal form. She reached for him. Don't touch me, he roared, the curse's voice trying to drive her back. He recoiled, his form dissolving into a swirl of angry red and silver mist. But she didn't hesitate. She plunged her hands into the mist, into the heart of his spiritual storm. The contact was agony. 1,000 volts of raw, chaotic energy surged into her, a feeling of pure hatred and rage that was not her own. At the same time, she felt Malon, his love, his despair, his terror. The two forces ripped at her, threatening to tear her mind apart. She focused on one thing, the feeling of him, the man she loved, buried beneath the curse. I am here, Malon, she whispered into the swirling chaos. I promised I would remember. I remember you. She pushed through the storm, and her hands found purchase. Not on flesh, but on something more real. On his soul, her fingers closed around his spectral shoulders. The mist solidified. He was before her again. His body racked with tremors, the red light flaring and dimming as he fought for control. Aveline, we run, he gasped. His own voice, a final desperate plea. I'm not running, she said, her voice full of a strength she didn't know she possessed. I'm not your executioner tonight. I am your Luna, and I am claiming my king. She leaned in, closing the final inch between them. She ignored the scream of the curse in her mind, the feeling of her own life force being siphoned away. She focused only on the wound on his throat, the anchor point of their broken oath, and she pressed her lips to it. The world exploded. It was not a kiss of flesh, but of spirit, of essence, of two souls crashing together with the force of a dying star. For a single blinding moment, she was him. She felt the crushing weight of the curse, the endless freezing cold of the void, the tearing agony of his spirit. And he was her. He felt the year of silent grief, the sting of betrayal, the unbending core of her love for him. They were one, bound completely for the first and last time. In that instant of absolute connection, she made her choice. She did not sever the bond. She did not break the oath. She poured all of herself into it. All her love, all her grief, all her strength. She flooded the bond with the truth of her sacrifice, with the memory of their love. She held nothing back. The curse, a creature of hate and despair, could not withstand it. It was like dousing a fire with the purest, cleanest water. It recoiled, shrieking a silent, psychic scream. It tried to flee, to detach from Malon's spirit, but the bond, now blazing with a pure, white light, held it fast. It was trapped. Aveline felt a tremendous tearing sensation. The bond was not breaking. It was fulfilling its final purpose. The oath had said death will not part us, and it wouldn't. The white light intensified, emanating from the point where her lips met his ghostly wound. It filled the cabin, burning away the shadows, silencing the psychic scream of the curse. She felt Malon's spirit surge, not with power, but with peace. He was finally free of the rage, of the fight. She felt his gratitude, his unending love, a final, silent goodbye that was more profound than any words. And then together they let go. The light collapsed inward, a supernova in reverse, pulling everything with it. The curse, Malon's spirit, and the bond that had tied them all together. For a heartbeat, there was a void, a perfect, absolute silence in the center of the cabin. And then it was over. Aveline fell to her knees on the cold stone floor, gasping. The room was just a room again. The unnatural cold was gone. The oppressive presence had vanished. She was alone, truly, completely alone. She slowly raised a trembling hand to her throat. The mark, the scar that had defined her for a year, was gone. Not faded. Gone. The skin was smooth and unmarked, as if it had never been there at all. The bond was broken. The curse was annihilated. And Malon was free. Gone to the peace he had been denied for so long. She stayed there on the floor as the first rays of the true dawn crept into the cabin, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sorrow or of grief. It was a tear of release. Her king was gone. But she had saved his soul. Her promise was finally, truly kept. Spring came to the Whisper Wood on silent feet. It crept in with the scent of thawing earth and damp moss, turning the frozen ground soft once more. Meltwater trickled over stones, a sound like tiny, hopeful bells. After a long, brutal winter, the world was breathing again. Aveline felt the change in her own bones. The phantom cold that had haunted her for a year was gone, replaced by the gentle warmth of the morning sun on her skin. She sat on the porch of the small stone cabin, a simple woolen cloak wrapped around her shoulders, watching the light spill into the hidden valley. She was no longer a prisoner, no longer a ghost. After that night, after she had unmade a universe to save a single soul, she had walked out of the forest at dawn. Not as a fugitive, but as a woman with nothing left to fear. She found Keon and his search party at the edge of the woods. They had lowered their weapons at the sight of her. The haunted, broken creature they had chased into the darkness was gone. In her place stood someone quiet, whole, and utterly changed. She had told them everything, the curse, the choice, the final sacrifice. She spoke to Keon and the elders, her voice steady, withholding nothing. She owed Malon's memory and his people the full and terrible weight of the truth. The pack had not celebrated her. They had not embraced her. They had done something far more profound. They had grieved with her. They grieved for their lost king, for the cursed bloodline he had carried, and for the impossible burden their Luna had borne in silence. Kalis had formally stepped down as regent, his face etched with a shame that was heavier than any crown. He had knelt before her and begged the forgiveness she had freely given. The pack was healing. They had chosen Keon to lead them, not as a king, but as an alpha who would guide them through the long process of rebuilding their trust and their future. The throne remained empty. It would, they decided, for a generation. A memorial to the king who had loved them enough to ask for death, and the Luna who had loved him enough to grant it. Aveline had refused any title, any position of honor. She had asked only for solitude. They had given her the cabin, Malon's secret place, as her own. They brought her supplies, leaving them respectfully at the edge of the valley, and then they left her to her peace. She traced the smooth skin of her throat. No mark, no scar. The physical testament to her bond was gone, but the love remained. It wasn't a burning, aching thing anymore. It was a quiet, foundational warmth, like the bedrock beneath the mountains. It was a part of her, a memory that gave her strength, not sorrow. She no longer looked for his ghost in the shadows. She felt his presence in the health of the land he had died to protect. She saw him in the strength of the pack that was learning to lead itself. She heard him in the wind that whispered through the pines, a sound that was no longer lonely, but free. Footsteps on the path made her look up. It was Keon. He moved with a new confidence, the heavy mantle of leadership settling on his broad shoulders. He carried no weapons. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, his expression open and respectful. Aveline, he said, his voice was warm. He no longer called her Luna, and for that she was grateful. Keon, she replied, her own voice soft but clear. The scouts returned from the southern border, he said, getting straight to the point, as was his way. The rogue packs are scattering. Without a cursed alpha to draw their darkness, their power is breaking. The territory is secure. That is good news, she said, and she meant it. Malon's final legacy was peace. Keon nodded, shifting his weight. He looked around the valley, at the waterfall, at the blooming wildflowers. This is a good place. Peaceful. Yes. He finally met her eyes, and she saw the question he had come here to ask. The council meets on the next full moon, he said carefully. They will formally name me Alpha of the Thorn Pack. We would be honored if you would stand with us. As an elder, a lore keeper, your name would be cleared, your honor restored in the histories for all time. It was a good offer, a kind one. It was a path back to the life she had once known, a place of respect and purpose within the pack. Everything a wolf was supposed to want. Aveline looked away from him, her gaze traveling up the sheer rock faces to the sky above. She had spent a year defined by a mark on her throat, by a title, by a secret. She had lived in the shadow of a throne. Now, she was just Aveline, and it was enough. My honor does not need to be restored, Kian, she said gently. It was never lost, it was just quiet. She looked back at him, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in over a year. My place is here, my purpose was Melon, I fulfilled it. Now my time is my own. He held her gaze for a long moment, and then he nodded, a deep understanding passing between them. He saw that she wasn't rejecting the pack. She was finally choosing herself. Then we will protect your peace, he said, and it was a solemn vow. Always. He turned and walked away, leaving her to the quiet solitude of the valley. Aveline watched him go, feeling a sense of closure settle over her like the softest fur. The pack was in good hands. The past was at rest. She stood up and walked to the edge of the meadow, near the pool fed by the waterfall. She knelt and dipped her hands into the achingly cold, clear water, washing away the dust of the morning. Her palms, once shredded and bloody, were now healed, covered in a network of fine, silvery scars. A map of her journey. She looked at her reflection in the water. The woman who stared back was not a Luna, not a murderer, not a savior. She was just a woman whose love had been strong enough to outlast death itself. And she was free. The moon had seen their scars long enough. Tonight she would watch them heal.